say, Madam Speaker, while we reflect on this issue of our society suddenly having to deal with precarity and insecurity, well, there are many people in this country who lived with precarity and insecurity and failing health systems for decades. They're the First Nation people of our country, living in reserves on incredible territories of natural wealth where the treaties took them off their territories and put them on what are essentially internal displacement camps with substandard housing, substandard infrastructure, no access to clean water. And I mention it, Madam Speaker, because yesterday the Minister of Indigenous Services made an announcement that he was going to create a new website to deal with the water crisis. A website. We remember the Prime Minister, when he was first elected, saying his #1 priority was to guarantee clean water to First Nations. And most across Canada, people said, of course. How could the richest country, one of the richest countries in the world, not guarantee clean water for its citizens? Citizens said to themselves, a country with so much beautiful, natural, clean water, how is it possible that people would be having to drink from dirty and polluted water? Not just in one community, but in community after community after community. And the Prime Minister said he'll have mission accomplished by March 2021. Well, we're not even close to that. And the Auditor General last week put out a damning report that says it will be years. So this website the minister's bringing out is like, he wants to show the successes that we've had, to turn away the attention from the ongoing systemic failures. And I mention, Madam Speaker, in terms of this issue of the pandemic, because of the insecurity and the precarity and the need to get away from these false 20th century ideologies. These false ideologies that somehow it's the fault of the First Nation communities for the fact that they don't have access to clean water. These are the systems that have been put in place by Indian Affairs. They remain in place despite the fact that 2005, the Auditor General wrote a condemning report about Indian Affairs and the crisis in water. And remember, Paul Martin was announcing he was going to spend billions to clean the water systems. Mission accomplished, not a chance. 2011, the Auditor General wrote a damning report on the crisis of water. And people might not remember, but one of the very first acts that Prime Minister Stephen Harper brought in when he was elected was a plan to get clean water to reserves. And yet in 2011, the Auditor General report read just like 2005. 2018, the Parliamentary Budget Officer issued a report that said this government was not going to meet their promise. And of course, last week we had the damning report by the Auditor General. This is not a great mystery, and I'd like to walk people through why these things happen. It is structural, it is systemic, and it is based on a system of racist colonialism. Because what happens with First Nation communities is that the federal government will always insist on spending the cheapest amount of money to fix the problem. This policy of the lowest bid has meant that we've had in community after community after community, operators come in, say they'll do the job for cheap because other, more credible companies won't touch the project. They're doing them in isolated fly-in communities where the costs are elevated, and these companies know they'll take the bid. There's going to be cost overruns, number one. There'll be delays, and if there's problems, they'll just cut corners. So that's the first failing. The government, the minister has refused to change the policy on that. The second issue is that the Auditor General points out that they're using the same failed funding formula that goes back over 30 years, which is the refusal to put in proper operations and maintenance funding. Because what Indian Affairs wants to do is keep the ministers happy. What the ministers want to do is they want to cut a ribbon. They want to announce mission accomplished and move on. But if you don't have an operations and maintenance budget, the plants fail. So Martin Falls First Nation, lightning hits the sewage lift. It's an isolated community. Well, how are they going to fix that on their own? Government says that's not our problem. So a failed sewage lift begins as a problem and then becomes more systemic. And then the government will spend upwards of $2 million a year flying bottled water into a community like Martin Falls, but they won't deal with the systemic failings in the first place, which you need to have operations maintenance training to make sure that these plants work. The other issue that the government does is they will build a plant and declare victory. We have plants that have been built that don't meet building codes. Now, if that happened in a provincial jurisdiction or in a municipality, there would be an investigation. When it comes to Indian Affairs, it's just another day at the office. The company that didn't meet the building code at this project can get hired at the next project. Why? Because they're going to do it on the cheap. We had a community in the Northwest where they built the water plant, cut the ribbon and made the announcement and left. And people still the next day, the grandmothers had to walk to the river with buckets of water. Why? Because they built a water plant. They didn't put any money aside to get pipes into the homes. Now, if you did that in a municipality, there would be an investigation. If you did it at the provincial level, people would be fired. If you did that at Indian Affairs, hey, you just might get promoted because it's another day at the office. And these inequities are not just in the far north. Let's talk about Maniwaki. It's just up the road. You have a municipality at Maniwaki, and you have Kitigan ZB Reserve, and one has clean water and one doesn't. How is that possible? Because one is under the provincial jurisdiction in Quebec, that they have water standards, and the other is under the federal government. Every region of this country has water standards that you have to meet. The only place that water standards are not in existence is on reserve. And why is that? Well, the reason for that is because if the federal government actually had standards, they'd have to spend money, and they will not spend money. Now, Madam Speaker, the other issue is that with the website that they're going to create, every community is going to have their own page on a website. We already have a website, and the government lies on the website. The government has, for instance, Bearskin Lake is under construction. Bearskin Lake's not under construction. We've been waiting over a year to get the feasibility report agreed to. Now, I have this report here. It's called the Project Implementation Procedures Manual for Water and Wastewater Systems from Public Works and Government Services Canada, Client Service Team for Indian and Northern Affairs Canada. I run out of breath just saying the title. If you look at this, this is page after page after page of hoops that Indigenous communities, many of them in the far north, many of them impoverished, have to jump through to satisfy the department. Chief Shining Turtle, who's been a very strong voice on the need to actually listen to First Nations and put in place coherent systems, has told the government again and again, these manuals are manuals for failure. So when I hear the Minister of Indigenous Services say, the department doesn't want to impose a solution, they want to work with them, he's making it sound like he's their best life coach. What he's really doing is gaslighting communities by making it seem as though it's their fault that bad decisions are made. When you look at these reports and the amount of hoops that they got to go through, and they still end up with underfunded systems that fail. I want to give a couple more examples for people so they really understand how this failure works systemically. The government will say they were going to get clean water, say in Attawapiskat. But they don't want to look at the holistic system. The fact that we may build a water system, a water plant, but we don't have the pipes proper to actually get clean water. So by the time it runs through the plant to the homes, the water's already contaminated from chemicals. In Attawapiskat, as well as in many other communities, they will not look at where the water source comes from. They want to take it from the cheapest source. So if you take water from a stagnant pool, you're going to have problems. But if the stagnant pool is close to the plant, well, hey, Indian Affairs says, there's your water source. There might be a much cleaner source down the road, but Indian Affairs won't spend that money. So they will take a stagnant water pool, they will run it into the plant, which means they will have to use an enormous amount of chemicals to keep it clean. Then they will run it through substandard pipes where there's more chemical contamination, so that the point is by the time it reaches the homes, you're dealing with toxic water. And the government says they're going to get mission accomplished on that. So what does that mean? That means the little girl who heard I was coming to Attawapiskat and met me on a street corner with a cardboard sign she was wearing. And she said, the sign said, I have only one kidney. I need fresh water to live. No child should have to put on a cardboard sign to say how their very life is threatened by bad water. Why does that child have only one kidney? It's because in Attawapiskat, the children have been poisoned for decades by toluene and benzene that was in underneath the school, and kidney damage is one of the fundamental symbols of that. I think of the little girl in Saskatchewan whose skin rashes are so bad they actually were picked up in international media and said, this is Canada. And every few months, my office sends her medication because they're 600 miles from a pharmacy. That is the failure of government. That these are children whose lives we're talking about who get cut short by precarious, failed systems. So we are here today, Madam Speaker, to push through the legislation to keep workers safe. But my call to the government is they need to stop playing games with the lives of First Nation people when it comes to water, and we need to get a credible system in place. Thank you.
Question.